Chapter 9, Cultural and Spiritual Influences. Culture and spirituality are often interconnected, although they don't have to be. So, when we think of the word culture, which is what we're going to discuss first, it's the integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group. So, it's a very complex concept, and different disciplines define it in different ways. The reason we care about culture is when it comes to grief and loss, culture can often inform the behaviors, the practices, the reactions to grief that you see in people. In some cultural groups, it may not be considered appropriate to talk about death and or grief. So there's a lot of silencing around it. There may be objections to the term end of life or predicting a death in medical circles. Um, Things like sadness and anger may be viewed as a sign of weakness. And then there's also gender based stereotypes or expectations that can still exist regarding how one should behave when you're grieving. Culture can also influence how someone feels about asking for assistance or receiving assistance. So, some cultures may value independence or just dependence only on family. So, they wouldn't be looking for their workplace to be reaching out and assisting. There can also be negative reactions to any suggestions that someone might consider having therapy. Place. Cultural awareness is a term, and it's just to describe that you are aware of the differences in values, beliefs, and norms of people. So you really want to cultivate cultural awareness. When you don't understand these differences, that's when you can potentially come across as disrespectful with someone. This is a really good case example from the text. So push pause, have a read through, and think about all the different aspects of grief and loss that are being influenced by someone's frame of reference. So, again, just the risk when you don't fully understand a culture, and of course you're never going to fully understand, is that there may be things you could do to be helpful that you're just not aware of. You could offend the person. You could misinterpret reactions. So these are all things that suggest that this would be helpful for you to spend some time studying. So this module this week has a lot of different cultural practices you can look at around grief and bereavement. So in spite of understanding a culture, it's always really important to understand that an individual within a culture is still an individual. So just because a particular group behaves in a certain way does not mean that that is the way each individual is going to behave. So even if we come from a cultural background that is similar to someone else, their reactions to grief, what they expect, what they need is not necessarily going to be the same as ours. So you can see this is very complex concept, and a lot of it is learning as you go, but also recognizing that this culture could be playing a role in what you're seeing. So the idea is, can you develop the competence or just the sensitivity to know that you don't know everything, and sometimes you need to do some homework or ask some important questions. So, spirituality and religion, again, meaningful influences in people's lives. They are slightly different, but they can play a role when it comes to coping with death and loss. And so, the broader term of spirituality now is around what gives meaning to your life. And religion tends to be more narrowly defined and focused on institutional expressions of beliefs. So this again is going to play a role in how someone is reacting to their loss. Recognizing, of course, that even though they're closely intertwined, there's other factors that can be coming into play that will influence someone's response to loss. just as you can't be expected to be culturally competent in every culture from across the world, the same thing for religious and spiritual differences. You just need to approach this with care and recognize that each person is going to have their own beliefs. And so your language, you need to be conscious of it and not making any broad statements like, well, at least the person's in a better place, or anything that would infer a certain spiritual direction or approach on your part. You really want to stay neutral on that. Just listen to what the person wants to share and let them lead where the conversation will go. Those of you who have been in a couple of my classes know I'm a really big believer in self-awareness as a leader. And so this spiritual tool might be an interesting one, or just these questions to ask yourself. So I'm going to suggest maybe push pause and think about your own approach to spirituality and how it informs or doesn't inform you. So the last piece of this is just your own spirituality. We know that this can also be helpful to you as a person who is in a support role. And it's important just to understand that um, we're not imposing any of our own spiritual or religious beliefs or practices on other people, and also not letting that come across in our language when we're trying to support someone. And the same with culture.